for me, besides just saying hello, I am a community program manager here at Autodesk, and I will be here to basically just be in the background and help out Saul and Jacob. So I will let them take it from here.
Thanks. So I am Jacob Small. I'm a technical consultant based out of Boston. Sorry, no longer based out of Boston, Massachusetts. That's what I get for looking at the screen here. Let's go ahead and update that. I'm actually out of Stockholm, Sweden now. All right, so yeah, I relocated. Been with Autodesk for 5.5 years now. And yeah, I describe myself as a Dynamo form junkie. You will see me working on Dynamo stuff at all hours of the night, no matter where I might be located in the world. So,
yeah, can attest. Jacob was posting responses on the forum at 3 a.m. numerous times. The man is a little mad. But anyway, hello everyone. My name is Saul. I'm a product manager working on Dynamo. That's sort of my responsibility to guide it into the future. And I like talking to all of you and every other customer to do that. I describe myself as a curious human being, originally from New Zealand, but currently based in Boston, Massachusetts. So welcome everyone today. We're going to have our 47th installation in the Dynamo Office Hours series, hosted by the Community Conversations team. And this one is around what's new in 2024 host products. So in essence, all of the cool stuff that we release in Dynamo over the course of around about a year gets wrapped up into this presentation. And you should have access to this now in things like Revit 2024, Civil 3D 2024, and all of our other host applications. And today, we will do what we usually do, which is a presentation around about 20 to 30 minutes of slides today. In terms of our live demonstration, we actually don't have one baked today. We'd love to riff off everybody in the call, and anything that you see on any of these different screens, please do keep it in the bank and let us know. You can interject any point in time. Like Tiana said, we like it to be a conversation. We don't want it to be a presentation per se, and so Q&A can be scattered throughout.
all right, so
Jacob,
let's get
over to you.
Let's get right into it. So before we got really anything started, I wanted to make sure that we had taken the time to sort of show everybody where they could get more information and documentation on all the different features that we're showing today. So here are some links. Now, I know you might not all be able to sort of copy paste or sort of type them up on the fly. So feel free to grab a screenshot. We'll see if we can get them pasted into the chat. But effectively, it's going to be dynamobim.org/ whatever it is that we've written out there. So what is predictive scripting with node autocomplete, dashes instead of spaces, or Dynamo Core 2.17 release, or 2.16 release, 2.15, so on and so forth. As well as I wanted to put a particular shout out to dynamobim.org/roadmap so you can sort of see what the team's currently working on. We've got a quick screenshot of that over there on the right, as well as sort of things that are sort of planned in the future and things that have been released fairly recently. So great resources all around. The other thing, as Sol mentioned, we don't really have a demo. It's actually really hard to say, like, here, let me show you the settings file. Woo, right? So rather than sort of—
It might be woo. Who knows?
It might be to somebody else. To me, it's like, yay, a JSON or an XML, I should say. So who knows? We want to show what's kind of important to you guys, though. So as we go through the slides, take note of what you're curious about. Let us know what that is so that we can sort of cover some of that stuff when we get to the demo time. If we don't have demo stuff, I don't know, maybe we'll just do some fun geometry stuff. You know, nothing, no question too complex, too basic, or whatever else. If you want to talk generative design or whatever it may be, go ahead and put it in the chat. But we are going to give preference to the stuff that's sort of related to the features that we're going to show today.
Cool, thanks, Jacob. So first of all, we want to talk about predictive scripting, otherwise known as sort of node autocomplete, and in this case, empowered by machine learning. So as Jacob said in 2 slides previous, there is a dedicated blog post to this, and you see a screenshot on the right-hand side for that, that explains sort of the ins and outs and the reasons why we're choosing to go down this route, and some really cool stuff, particularly around how services work and how machine learning models work, and why we are hoping and thinking that this is actually going to really superpower your ability to build Dynamo graphs in the future. The cool thing about this is that it's going to get better over time as well. That's the beauty of a service. As we improve the model, it's going to get better, which is really cool. So what we've done is we've taken machine learning, sorry, we've taken node autocomplete, which we had previously. We had a different sort of approach, which was matching object types. We call it node type match. And that was great as a first step, but not so good around things like edge cases and not so good around things like inheritance. So using a higher level or higher order function, for example, like curve.length, was not actually going to show up in any of your line output nodes, which wasn't so good. So we've supercharged node autocomplete now with machine learning, which means actual node combinations that are used in real graphs is what's going to show up, and they're going to be hierarchically ranked and stacked based on the actual node in question. So phase one, which we're in right now, is essentially decontextualized. It is a singular node with a singular port, and how many different sort of nodes have come in and out of that based on a bunch of different training graphs that Jacob gave, I gave, we had in our sort of sample data and so on. Cool thing about that is it's great today, but it's going to get even better as time goes on. And we're working on sort of improving and auto-generating or auto-training that model over time. So very excited on that front. And you can learn all about it in that blog post, as I just mentioned. Cool. So the way that it works, and this is showcasing on the right-hand side, a couple of these different sort of edge cases and sort of like different scenarios on how these two different modes work. It triggers from any input port or output port. So the beauty of this compared to searching for a node is that you can actually start anywhere in your graph and start working either upstream or downstream to build a graph in any direction. This means if you're using the ML autocomplete one, you're going to be building it based on what the machine learning model thinks the right nodes are, and generally it's a pretty good match. And if using the node type approach, it's going to give you every single possible option that is sort of hard-coded or hard-matched to that type, like a line to a line or a point to a point. And it gives you all of these choices in the machine learning option based on what we call confidence. And you can think of that really just as probability in this first iteration. And it's going to be confident to certain degrees on whether or not the node should be correct. So you'll notice that the confidence ratings, if you can read this sort of small image here, on the left-hand side of the recommended side is essentially like a percentage. They roughly add up to about 100% overall for every single option that's down here. So bear in mind that a node percentile of 15%, if it's the top node, is equally weighted to another one, which is 100%. It's just purely based around confidence. The more nodes you have, the smaller percentages are going to be. The less nodes you have, the higher those percentages are going to be. And then the other cool thing on both of these typologies is that it has placement logic to automatically wire up your graph too. So it's currently in a reasonable state. We're looking to improve that. It does have some nodes jump around a little bit here and there. So if you're OCD about the way that your graphs look, like build it first and then clean it up later. And what you'll see on screen here is just a very short GIF of what it's actually doing. So I'm just starting with a family instance.byPoint node and using node autocomplete for every single node after this to build it. In this case, placing a family of a chair and then rotating that family of that chair as well. So this graph was actually much faster to build, even for an advanced user like myself, than using search because you're clicking less. You simply click, 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 and it's placing stuff and wiring it up for you, rather than having to search for those nodes, place those nodes, wire those nodes, and have it run. So there's benefits for both beginners and learning how to use Dynamo and start to explore better, but also benefits for advanced users in the speed side of the spectrum.
Awesome. I really do appreciate sort of the fact that this is going to kind of grow with the user base as more people leverage it and we get more data set. We're going to get even more stuff. So really looking forward to putting graphs together much faster than we were before, and also teaching new users much more effectively. So I'm really thrilled that this service is out there. The next feature we wanted to cover was kind of graph status as a glance. Now, hopefully everybody remembers sort of both the old node states as well as some of the new ones, because these were introduced in 2.13 in terms of sort of the coloring, but the teams made them actually much better over time. So you can see that they're much more apparent than they were before, and they continue to sort of provide all the useful info that we might really be looking to sort of gather from different users. The graph footer also gives you a great view of sort of the high profile states of your nodes. So you can see down at the bottom of your run screen, not only will it say sort of run completed or run completed with errors or run completed with warnings, but it's also going to give you kind of the quick metrics around how many of those different warnings we might actually have in the graph. The other big change here is that we've added a new info state that sort of lets you know that FYI, you're doing something that might be worth taking note of. Not severe enough for a warning, definitely not an error, but definitely something to keep in mind. An example of this is if you made an integer that is actually larger than a 64-bit integer can be, meaning you've exceeded the size of a number that Windows can utilize, which is actually not that uncommon, oddly enough, but it's not the most common use case ever. But yeah, now that that's in there, we can sort of inform users as they start to take those sort of actions that, hey, the number slider is not going to get any bigger than this, which is pretty cool. This has also enabled a great new sort of view extension called the Graph Node Manager. Once you get that extension launched, you're going to see this sort of layout over on the right-hand side, or if you undock it, it would be undocked as a floating window. The great thing with Graph Node Manager is you can sort of filter down the list of different nodes that you have in your graph, find the content that you're really after. Based on node names, right? We can search, we can filter by node type, filter by node state, grab stuff by name, as well as sort of identify the different types, states, and issues kind of overall. We do have handy icons to indicate each one of those, and you can even copy the error message to the clipboard, which I know is something that used to, users used to struggle with in the old days, and with the 2.13, we sort of lost the capability to copy paste from the pop-out windows, but now we've got an even better way to grab that content, because we can also export the entire node list to CSV or JSON, so you can sort of see a larger state that you can sort of share with end users. I'm really intrigued to see how that's going to simplify troubleshooting, right? You get that message from a user like, hey, I've got this graph isn't running, and it's like, well, I can't reproduce it. Can you send me your node state exported? So some really good stuff that's going to come out of that. The last feature to note about this is if you do click on any of the different items in the list, it will actually zoom to find that node on the canvas. So if you are looking for the particular one that's in an error state, you can just go ahead and click on that, and it will bring you right where you want to be, which is really, really useful.
A couple of other shout outs. So on the previous slide, Jacob, if you go back to that graph footer at the bottom, you see how it's doing counts. Those are actually clickable as well. This is like a quick hit selection, and they can zoom you around your graph, and it's just going to sequentially take you through all nodes that are in whatever state you're clicking on. So it's going to be either error, warning, or info state. They can very quickly get you to that if you've only got a handful of potential issues in your graph. And then the zoom states themselves, they trigger when you zoom out. So the color overlays on these nodes trigger when you zoom out to a certain threshold, which doesn't make sense if I tell you what it is. You just zoom out and you see it. Then on the Graph Node Manager side, you'll notice there's some cool things in here that might not be super apparent at face value. So number one, people have been asking forever to be able to search inside of their canvas for their nodes. This is what allows you to do this. If you search here, it'll give you every single node in every single state. And we're calling these also like type, states, issues, and outputs that are associated with that node. So if you're looking to debug, like Jacob said, it's also going to give you on the outputs, it's going to tell you what is returning null values and what is returning empty lists, which are common issues that were previously really difficult to actually troubleshoot in older versions of Dynamo. We're also showing things like errors and warnings, like Jacob mentioned, and also the ability to have rename nodes searched here too. So very excited to see how you use this to troubleshoot the graphs that you have moving forward for yourself or for others if you're managing a library of these two. It should make your lives infinitely easier. Cool. So talking about making your life easier, the next couple of slides are talking about information at your fingertips. So, finding what you need when you need it, kind of like the golden goose inside of Dynamo. So really, we want to be able to help you if you don't really know what's going on with a particular node. And here we have added in what we call extended node help. And for those of you who've been around for a while in the Dynamo ecosystem, you might remember the Dynamo dictionary. All of that content is now inside of Dynamo. So this is only currently for Dynamo core nodes, but Civil 3D are about to drop in a not too distant future release their extended node help for their documentation. And we're going to work on that for the Revit side too. What that means is for any given node in core, if you right click on it and click that help icon or hit the F1 hotkey, it's going to give you sort of this extended information in the documentation browser. And this gives you a couple of really cool things. Number one, it gives you breadcrumbs at the top, which is enabling you to understand exactly where that node lives inside of the library if you want to explore the library and explore its sort of siblings, if you will. We also have this in-depth description, which is directly pulled from the dictionary or added to the core nodes if it hadn't previously existed. And then we have this awesome feature here as well, where you have this example file, which you can actually zoom in, pan around, and add to your graph. What this means is if you click on the lowest button in that orange circle box here, it's going to actually generate those nodes inside of your graph. It's going to insert them into it. So you can actually use that little micro graph itself and run it and get the result. We can feed that and bleed that into your actual graph too. It's going to also auto-generate inputs and outputs to show you, exactly what kind of types and then what kind of descriptions are associated with those values. So it should be able to actually unblock you with nodes that might not conceptually be easy to understand from the old paradigm of only really having a basic description. And for other information at your fingertips, we have added in a series of different getting started guides to Dynamo. There's 3 currently, and they help you orient around sort of the UI, they help you orient around sort of basic wiring up of nodes and wires. We're going to be adding these over time. That helps you not just read a static carousel, which we have in the past of an image with a few bullet points of text, but actually engage with the product and learn it by doing, which helps the kinesthetic learners amongst us, not just the visual ones. We also have a notification center that has been introduced into Dynamo. You'll notice this bell icon in the upper right. These notifications are going to be things that we as the Dynamo team send to you in the future. Make no purchasing decisions, but we're going to look to be able to have you send your own organization's messages from that notification center as well. And today it's mostly based around some of the salient blog posts, not every single one, that we think are really important for you to know about, as well as an ability for us to send out fixes to potential issues that crop up. So for example, you might be familiar with this package called the Dynamo Future file, which resolves the conflict between later versions of Dynamo and earlier versions of Dynamo. And we have a link to that in the notification window that helps you understand how to fix it, which is kind of cool. And then the last one to call out here is we created another extension called Export Sample Images. So this is essentially part of the infrastructure or the scaffolding that helps you build that extended node help, and you can use it to do that for your own content. It enables you to essentially select a target folder or a source folder of Dynamo graphs in a target folder, and it's going to automatically open them in sequence, take or export the node and background preview for those things, so for those graphs, and automatically create those sample images for you, which is kind of cool. And that goes hand in hand with another feature we have, we're not calling out here, which is sort of stubs out markdown files, another tool in the ecosystem. So basically trying to get you to a place where you can build this kind of content much, much faster than you can today.
Yeah, I think the export sample images is one of those ones that I would have made tons of use of back in the day when I was practicing, because every graph has its images, showing what it's supposed to look like when you open up, and to be able to just do that to an entire library, even not as a sort of package author, but as a graph library manager, is going to be a huge benefit to a lot of people. All right, next great new feature that's been sort of revamped and improved over the last year is groups and group styles. So tons of new updates to groups. In particular, group styles, where they've always been sort of really difficult to sort of manage at scale. Some great tools in Monocle to sort of help with that, but companies have really struggled to keep some sort of consistency because those files weren't necessarily easy to push around. Even if they had an internal standard or even an external standard like the one White Architecture AB published up on the Dynamo BIM blog many, many moons ago. So the latest round of updates to this also allowed sort of creating sort of the fully customizable styles in terms of color, font size, and more. This can then be deployed to the entire organization using the Dynamo settings XML file, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a few slides, and allowing for your company standards to sort of already be there for all the different users. Once the settings are in place, it's really easy to apply a style. You're just going to right click on the group and then go ahead and select the group style that you want to have from not only the standard styles that are there, but also the customized ones that you have added in, which is really cool. Font color and font sizes can still be changed sort of individually for on-the-fly settings to singular groups. If you don't want to apply the entire style, but portions thereof, you can still do that. The other cool feature that's been added is groups and groups and dragging of nodes and groups into a group, which is great. To sort of be able to sort of quickly organize stuff and sort of the collapsible stuff that I believe was all introduced in 2.1.3, but it might have been some in 2.1.4. Can't quite remember. It's all been so fast and furious in terms of all the great new updates. But in particular, what I do know is new is the Alt and left click hotkey to sort of quickly remove nodes from a group. So previously it was like highlight the group, right click, remove from group, which got a little bit difficult, but now it's much, much simpler with the Alt and left click. So really looking forward to getting my hands on that, which is going to be great.
Yeah. And shout out to John Pearson for that last bullet point. That was his first ever PR to Dynamo. So he's pretty excited about that.
Thanks, John.
Agreed.
All right. Now, I mentioned the Dynamo settings before. We now have it set up so that the settings are much easier to sort of move between systems. We can now import and export. And in fact, the first time you boot up the system for Dynamo, it's going to ask, hey, do you want to import a settings file if it doesn't already exist, which is very, very handy. This allows sort of the settings file to sort of be brought in the first time out. You don't have to worry about sort of getting your configurations all set up and ready to go. You can also import and export at any time from the preferences panel. And then once you go ahead and load those in, the next time you open up Dynamo, you do have to restart Dynamo, unfortunately. And I believe also Revit in some cases, if it's a hosted version, to sort of get the full reboot set up there. But once you get that done, those settings are going to take effect automatically. If you do export out, they get serialized out to the Dynamo settings XML file located in the app data folder typically, or whatever path you set it to save to. These typically are located under C, username, app data, roaming, Dynamo, Dynamo core, or Dynamo Revit, or Dynamo Civil, or whatever you have / version. To indicate which version you're in. So it can be a little bit difficult to find those, but app data roaming Dynamo is typically the first place you want to go with. Civil 3D, actually, now that I think of it, might have it in its own file, but we can cover that when in a later session dedicated to Civil, I guess.
Yeah, one call out on that previous slide, Jacob. So there's a splash screen that we added into Dynamo, which is the image on the upper right. This is not quite in Revit yet. It's actually going to be there in the next release, the first point release of Revit 2024 this year. And the splash screen is kind of cool because it tells you exactly how long it takes to load up Dynamo and the kind of steps that we go through in that process, like loading node libraries and loading packages and all that kind of cool stuff. And it gives you the ability to import the settings here before Dynamo starts up, which means it's actually going to take into effect those settings. If you do the import and export inside of a single session, depending on where you are and what those settings are, you might require a restart because they only get loaded once at initialization.
Good timing on that interjection, so I could get a couple coughs out there, Saul. Thank you.
Nice.
All right.
Most welcome.
So the last piece, if you do set those up and you sort of have a large number of users sort of moving those XML files around can be pretty difficult. So conveniently, custom install has been added to our Revit deployment. So effectively, the way this works, you're going to go to the accounts portal, configure your custom install for Revit. At manage.autodesk.com/product/deployment/create. Yes, that's a very long web address, but there you have it. Choose Revit from the product page, go into the customations page, and then upload your settings file. Now, again, you have to export that settings file from Dynamo, get that version out. That's going to be sort of your guideposts that we're going to push out to all the different users. And then Dynamo is going to automatically be deployed with that settings when it starts by copying them over to the app data folder. With the following hierarchy. So the deployed location for program data and then the local location for app data. So it's going to go to both of those locations. If there isn't a settings file, Dynamo is going to go ahead and create its new one as it always has, copying from the deployment location or your previous version of Dynamo or populating a default set upon the first run. So if nothing existed, it's going to go ahead and make one right off the bat, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, it's kind of cool because this allows you to now make deployments using Dynamo and have some degree of consistency across your organization, which we're excited to see how you use that. You know, if you're talking about things like the group styles that Jacob said earlier, you can customize your own company's colors. your own way of standardizing group names and so on can all be added into that space, which is kind of exciting. All right, so next we're going to talk about under lock and key, which is in essence talking a little bit about security features. So in Dynamo, we introduced this feature called trusted locations or trusted file locations that allow you as a user or as an organization to essentially define which parts of your machine that you trust. So Windows by default has certain lockdowns or certain admin locations that external applications cannot write to. That gives you a degree of security, and we are essentially tacking onto that system. So what this means is, if you are from an untrusted location, Dynamo is going to completely block that run, which means it will never ever, you'll never be in a situation if you're running from an untrusted location where any kind of code whatsoever can be run, including any potential malicious code. The caveat here, we have not found any malicious code that has been sort of pushed around inside of the Dynamo ecosystem to date. This is essentially getting ahead of any potential issues in the future. You also get the chance, if you want to temporarily run this graph from a location or to file or trust that location for the future. And if you don't care about trust whatsoever, you can turn that entire feature off. It's your choice. We have also added in antivirus scanning for packages. They get loaded up onto the package manager. Again, there have only been a handful of ones that we've been testing that have contained sort of malicious code. And sometimes people might be uploading things that they don't know is malicious. So take this with a grain of salt, but nothing so far that we've found is dangerous. What it does mean, though, is that the standard terms and conditions of using the package manager still persist. So it's more secure than it was in the past, but it doesn't mean it's guaranteed to be 100% secure because of the way antivirus works, which means it's sometimes reactive rather than proactive. A virus comes out and antivirus has to essentially be updated to match that virus pattern. So it's catching things that are essentially already out there in the ecosystem as opposed to new stuff. So still use package manager the same way you have to date, whether or not you want to be fully open with that or a little bit more restricted. That's completely up to you. We also have added in an authentication experience into Dynamo now, which is allowing for package upload from every single instance, including format, robot structure analysis, and alias, which previously didn't have the ability to do that because they were out of profit and weren't hooked into their host authentication system. And it also opens the door for really cool stuff to happen in the future, which requires us to understand like what you have access to around things like Autodesk Docs and Autodesk Platform Services and so on and so forth. And the last thing here we've added in is a better ability for us to understand what goes wrong when it goes wrong. So this is called a customer error reporting or CER report. And this, in essence, collects some crash-related data when Dynamo crashes. In the past, we collected very basic things and created an issue that you had to sort of fill in yourself. This still does that. It sends it to a different place. It selects a little bit more around like what you're trying to do in the machine, a couple of like little machine things. You can opt out of this. You don't have to send it if you don't want to. And you can also add in your own comments and add in your email address if you wish to be contacted to be able to, for us to help have a conversation around what might have gone wrong and try and reproduce that to fix and resolve.
Yeah, and those crash error reports beyond just Dynamo are super important in terms of getting issues resolved and stuff like that. It's basically an opportunity for the development team to see kind of why things are happening. So if you have Revit crash, AutoCAD crash, Dynamo crash, whatever it is, we don't necessarily know it unless that gets sent over. So the more of those we get, the better. And we do actually look over all of them in bulk at least, but in some instances, larger companies will actually have somebody dedicated to reviewing those error reports directly. It used to be part of my job actually, which is kind of crazy. So
yeah.
On to the next step. All right, so quality of life improvements. There's been a ton of little stuff that's been added, none of which that was necessarily like, hey, this can fill an entire slide, but it's actually 2 slides of a lot of little bullet points. So we'll go over those now. First up is preview bubbles and watch nodes. Whenever we have that sort of data exposed there, we've got primitive object coloring. So your strings will show up like strings, just like you were typing them in a code block, or if you were typing them in Python and other locations. It's sort of been as standardized as we can make it across the board, which is pretty cool. Nodes in a function state now also indicate that they're in a function state with the output port as opposed to sort of just with the other indicators that we had before. So we see sort of the gray output on the right-hand side because that is producing something. It's just not data that we might sort of typically expect. So that's been passed along, which is really handy. The align selection nodes, align selection for nodes now have sort of the icons to sort of let us know, which I got to say, I didn't realize how impactful that was until I actually was using it, because I always do that like shortcut hotkey, and I was like, wait, every time I'm like, wait, do I want distribute X, left, right? And now sort of seeing it there, super useful, because when I get confused on which one I want, it's just ready to go. After that, both the library and the Python node allow for text size control via the Alt and mouse wheel. So it is sort of one of those hidden shortcuts, but that's super useful, in particular when I've been demoing Python to customers and elsewhere in the world, writing my own as my eyesight starts to go late at night. I can sort of zoom in and see what it all is in there. We've also fixed a ton of bugs in 2.14 in particular. 88 different bugs were fixed and addressed in that single release, which is a lot. I don't know if that's a Dynamo record, but it's pretty high.
Probably.
Yeah, it's pretty high. I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't. So the bar's been set for future releases. And then last but not least, on this slide, the file path node now opens to the last set path rather than resetting the tree when you go to expand that out, which is really, really cool.
One point on that previous slide,
Yeah.
the currently hidden library and platform text scrolling or sizing is going to be not hidden in the next release of Dynamo for 2.19. So you'll get preference settings to be able to set both of those.
Make no purchasing decisions regarding that statement.
No, that's done. That's big. You can make a purchasing decision on that one.
All right. Cool. All right. The last four here, pin wire from right-click context menu has now been added to sort of a shortcut to hover over the wire option, which is really, really useful to sort of get to that much faster. We also have a capability to hide or show all wires to allow for sort of bulk operations and quickly identify where those missing data pipelines might have gone. I know a couple times I've been looking at graphs that had a bunch of wires hidden, and yeah, you can select a node and find them, but that, many nodes on canvas make for really hard data tracking. After that, the watch node is now going to be dynamic, so it's going to automatically size based on the size of the data that you give it to sort of allow for scoping itself manually as well as automatically, which is great. And then the list remove, if not, supports no longer just the DS core types like line and point and stuff like that, but all C# types. So if you're working with .NET data type, you can go ahead and use remove if not with that particular data type, which is super useful in terms of the Revit and Civil 3D interoperability.
Yeah, in particular, so you could, if you see in the orange icon here with the image, you could have used like int and stuff in the past, which is great, but that's not what was being returned from the object.type node. So sometimes that caused confusion with people. So now anything that's returned from the object.type node will correctly work in the remove if not node. And shout out to that particular node. It's awesome. I think more people should use it. This is a way to get around like filter by Boolean mask in a much shorter way if you know the exact type of stuff that you want. So if you're doing a selection in Revit and you've got a bunch of like random things like walls and floors and windows, and you just want your windows, you just type in windows there. That's just going to get you your windows. Pretty easy.
Yeah, super useful. All elements in active view followed by a remove if not is going to be a great workflow, I think, for a lot of users going forward.
Right. Okay. So we also have some funky new things to play with, in this case, some brand new nodes. So previously, the curve.normal parameter node took the like inherent normal of a curve, which, if you know anything about geometry kernels, means that they just choose a side because not knowing how something is generated generally is very difficult to sort of like understand start and end points and so on. So in the context of Revit, when you're drawing like a line, it actually understands start point and end point and has consistency from which side it comes. But if you're getting a line from other places and other sources, it might have been very random. So now what you can do is actually choose a consistent side to point at, which is really cool, because previously if you built like a polycurve with a bunch of disparate lines, you might have been getting these vector representations going off in every single direction, which is not so useful when you're trying to do stuff. We've also introduced a bunch of really awesome updates to polycurves. This did necessitate an upgrade to our geometry kernel, which means that older versions of Dynamo and newer versions are using different nodes for this. And this means that we've had to retire a couple of nodes and sort of add in a couple of replacements. So something like curve.offset in the past is now being replaced with curve.offset mini. The reason we can't name it the same way is a technical one. Just suffice it to say that we can't use the same name, unfortunately. Otherwise we would have, but offset mini does the same job as curve.offset. We also have this node polycurve.offset mini as well. The really cool thing about this, if you're looking at the GIF somewhat closely, is that it starts to understand those kind of conditions when it offsets in smarter ways than the previous one did. The previous node was actually just going to give you a bunch of different like overlapping curves that were really not that useful. So in this case, once you start to offset on the internal side and those nodes or those wires, sorry, those curves start to overlap with each other, it's going to understand what you're trying to do and actually give you multiple potential internally offset curves, which is kind of awesome, I think. We have also added in a bunch of different nodes around like solid repair, surface repair, polycurve.heal, and essentially all of these will repair invalid geometry. If you're getting random errors and warnings that are saying this geometry is not valid, these nodes should help you get it back into a valid state. And they can also do things like heal some self-intersecting curves with some sort of minor tolerances associated with it. So if your geometry is in a weird state, try these nodes. They should be able to help you out. And then big shout out to Chong MEP, who added in a string.getNumber node. So this is another community submission to Dynamo, which pulls all of the numbers out of a string. So if you want to pull those numbers out and then you can convert it to numbers afterwards, you can use this node to do it. And then some other funky new nodes to play with. In the past, we've had bounding boxes inside of Dynamo being axially aligned, which means they were only ever going to bound the object in the XY space, orientated to the XY space, which resulted in not necessarily the most minimum bounding box of that object, which was not necessarily so useful. So what we've done is we've added in a couple of new nodes, so bounding box by minimum volume and geometry by oriented bounding box that take the actual minimum possible bounding of that object. So you'll notice these are actually the same three objects rotated in different directions with the red and the orange. And the orange is the old school version, which is axially aligned, and the red is the new school version, which is the true minimum. What that means is you can use these nodes to actually do better like intersection problem calculations and things like Revit to say, give me all my families, give me the minimum bounding box and see if they're touching another one. Because using abstract geometry, if you've watched this series from the start, is much faster to work with than real geometry. And we've also added in this really cool new custom selection node that allows you to create any kind of dropdown that you wish to use. So you can use this in the context of player and GD, which is great. And this will return both, it will have a display name and a value. If every single value is of a particular type, it's going to return that type. So if everything's a string, it'll return strings. If everything's a number or a double or an int, it's going to return those. But if it's mixed, it's just going to return a string. So you might need to have like a string.toNumber node and a conditional check there if you wish. And this is cool because it enables you to be essentially better at calling out exactly what you're trying to do rather than using integer sliders and I1 or index 1 equals X and index 2 equals Y and all of that kind of confusing stuff.
Cool. I'm really looking forward to getting to use the minimum volume bounding boxes. That's going to be quite groundbreaking for a lot of stuff. In particular, if anybody watched the Revit automation on stairs where we cut the sections through the stairs and stuff like that, those bounding boxes were really difficult to sort of figure out because they have to be oriented a particular way in Revit, and you can't really draw a bounding box that way in Dynamo. So this is going to be a big help for a lot of users. Last up, we've got some node improvements where we've sort of fixed or amended some stuff that didn't quite work as well as we had hoped. First up is the Watch 3D node. You're now going to actually be able to see the geometry even if the previous node had its preview visibility turned off. So it'll sort of force that on, which is really great. The second one is the file path node, remembering the last file location per session. So when placing a new file path node, you don't have to sort of navigate the entire folder tree from scratch every single time, which is going to be a big time saver. The polycurve node now also supports trimming of input curves that overlap. So polycurve by joined curves and polycurve by grouped curves is going to be a really useful pair of nodes to work with that context. And we've also improved the SAT and SAB import nodes to allow for unit control. So you're no longer sort of importing without units. You're going to be able to import with particular units in the context of your project. All right, so that's everything that we had to show. onto the live demo. I've got Dynamo open, but I don't see anything in chat. So does anybody have anything that they'd like to see in particular? Nothing yet.
We'll pause here for a hot second and see if anyone's curious about anything we talked about today to see it live, because we're happy to demo it. Go ahead, hashtag speak now or forever hold your peace. And if you don't want to speak, Jacob's going to do something random.
The new nodes.
Augustine to say, yes, new nodes, nice.
New nodes. All right, so let's see, how can I find those? Because there are quite a few. Let's actually talk about polycurves. So we'll go into curves, and I'm going to actually take curve. So right off the bat, we can start to zoom on my library, right? So if I'm holding down my control keyboard modifier to sort of zoom in, zoom out as desired. So now that we can see my entire library as intended, we can start to scroll down here and look for curve.offset. So where am I? There is no offset. There is now offset mini. So I've got a polycurve kind of drawn here, and you can see it's a NURBS curve. We'll go ahead and we'll wire this one in, and you can quickly see that that's sort of offset as desired. But the big change here is we've got sign distance and plane normal. So towards that end, maybe this isn't the best initial geometry shape. Let me actually just hide this. We'll keep this for later. I'm going to generate some random points, point by coordinates. We're going to do math.random list 10 times 10. So it's going to give 10 random numbers between 0 and 10, and those will all be on the x-axis. I need my 0 for my y. I don't need a z. And then I need to rotate those. Rotate. Those need, well, rather than doing everything through design script, we'll try rotate to show some of those other features here. So we're going to use this rotate node.
And
rotate node. Rotate. We want the geometry rotate node. There we go. We're going to wire this in as my geometry, and then we need an origin. So we'll double click. Node autocomplete is showing up. We'll use the origin as my initial origin. Double click. What's our axis? We're going to go with the Z axis. You can see it's showing the 68%. So that's what we're after here. And then we need degrees. So I'm going to build a range from 0, 360, number, what did I have before? 10. So now you can see I've quickly rotated those around. Let's hide all this geometry. So we're looking at just these points, and then we'll do a polygon rather, by points. I don't think geometry rotate would have found that through autocomplete. Yeah, let's create low confidence.
Probably not yet. That's where we the model's going to get better over time.
Yeah, but you can see I've now generated a random polycurve. If I didn't like that, I could scale that up. I could change the things around, but that shape actually looks pretty good for what I wanted to do. And we'll take our curve offset mini, and we'll wire this in. And you can see it's sort of offsetting outwards. We're going to use a number slider. And we'll set this to be from -10 to 10. So we can get a little bit of range there and wire that in. This does ask for a plane normal. So just in case, we could put a vector dot.
It does have a default.
It does have a default. No recommendations on that one yet because it's a new node.
Yes.
Yeah. So vector dot z axis, there it is. It does have that as the default. To sort of pull the axis of the curve, but just in case, I like to sort of hard code that in there when possible. And now you can see as I pull that out, we're actually able to get two separate polycurves that are generated from that. So it used to be this was really, really difficult to do. And if you look back at the AU session I did last year with Dieter Vermeulen on generative neighborhoods, this exact action took like 60 nodes before this came out of the box. So super useful and probably one of the new nodes that I'm most excited for.
Jacob, if you use the polycurve to offset menu, there's actually a second option around rounding corners too.
Yeah, that's a good point. So polycurve.offset mini, which would be instead of under curve, it would be under polycurve, right? So then there we are, offset mini, last one in there. We can show this one off. Sign distance, extend circular, and then the plane normal. So we'll put our plane normal in as before, and then extend circular. We'll do true, false, false, true. And notice it's going to sort of round stuff off when it's that sort of interior corner otherwise, which can give some really interesting pieces. In particular, I can imagine that having a lot of benefit for roadway layout and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's based on the inside outside piece. So if you go to the positive direction, it's going to round off in a different way.
Yep. Anything that's a sort of concave, no, convex, there we go, direction, it's going to sort of round it out. So again, super useful, lots of cool stuff. That's a nice shape right there. We'll keep that up in handy.
The fish.
Yeah, it is a fish. You're right.
So Jacob, Majdi is asking a question, which is, if possible, Dynamo always says the elements in room node, wrong results or no results, any updates? So I did ask the question, Majdi, like, are you talking about a package node or an out-of-the-box Revit node here? Feel free to respond in chat if you want to. I'm not familiar with that node, but it has been a while since I've worked with rooms.
So I can speak a little bit to what I've seen from that in the past. Oftentimes the elements in room, effectively what's happening is if the room is not in the same coordinates as the as the current graph that you're in. So what I mean by that, remember the Revit API and Dynamo is always going to work off the internal origin. So if you've sort of shifted stuff around to get models to align as opposed to use the same internal origin for both files, you can start to see those kind of, hey, I know there's stuff in this room, but it's not quite working. There are ways around that, and you can actually do better sort of access to out of the box, or sorry, what elements are in which room through the API that you can kind of get access to, but again, it has to do with how the models are set up, and it can take a little while to sort of get everything configured correctly. So hopefully that sheds some light on what you're after. Cool. All right. So one more question answered, and a little bit less time on the form, perhaps for me. What else? Anybody else have? Anybody else have anything that they'd like to see demoed here? Let's see, what other new
do the file path node. I know it's a small thing, but I think it's a big thing.
That's a great point. So if I point at, what can I show here? Let's go to my Dynamo graphs for form. We'll just point at that RVT. I can't do anything with it. Oh, never mind. That was silly. Now it has to download that. Yeah, we're done. Okay. So now if I made a new file path, and then hit browse, it brings me right back to that same folder as opposed to the default directory, which is a huge benefit. Massive time saver, because typically when you're working with files, you're working with stuff that's out of a particular directory, which is a key piece.
Yep.
All right.
I also think that what's really impactful is the primitive object coloring coming into preview bubbles and watch nodes.
Yeah.
So like historically, Dynamo would have just gray for preview bubbles and watch nodes. So you couldn't tell if a number was actually a number or if it was a string. You kind of had to use object types or like be in the know to get there. And what it does now is gives you that quick heads up visually of what is actually a string or a number. And Jacob's about to demo that now.
Yeah, so we've got a piece of geometry in there. We've got a string, we've got a number. We can wire all those up, put a null in there too. And now when I wire those in, you can quickly see, you know, orange means string, blue means it's a number, that yellow color means null. Our geometry is still spelled out in the same sort of color that we had before, saying this is a polycurve, this is the number of curves in it. So we've got the same data, but it's sort of displayed as that. If it was in Revit, it would sort of indicate the same way that we had before there too, which is pretty good.
Yeah, this is good for debugging in conjunction with the Graph Node Manager, which you could pop open.
Yeah, that's a great point. So let's go into extensions, and we'll pop open the Graph Node Manager here. So as we pull this over, we can start to see I can now search my canvas for a particular node. So I do know that I had a polycurve by points node.
For polycurves.
Right. And then when I click on it, notice it's highlighted that node now. This is one of the ones that I had previously hidden, but it brings me right to it, including my polycurve.fillet nodes. And it also tells me kind of where that node's coming from. So it's under geometry, right? Library, geometry, polycurve. And then it's a constructor, so it's under create. So we can very quickly sort of get to that content that we're after. Polycurve actions, you can see again, same idea, geometry, so on and so forth. We can clear that search box right there and come back to the larger graph. We can see if something's in a warning state as well here. So where's that null? If I wire this null in here, we should see a whole bunch of errors. Yep, there we go, or warnings rather. And now we can start to sort of explore what those are, right? So when I click on this, and oh, I can't zoom on this one. Something perhaps for a future release making project decisions.
It's already zoomed. It's already zoomed.
Oh, no, I can't zoom inside the this piece to make
text
bigger.
Sorry, text zoom, right? Yeah.
But in any case, I can go directly to the node by clicking on it, and you can see it sort of lists out what that warning is. We can copy that to the clipboard. I'll put a string on canvas here. All right, and there's the full string. Throwing an error because of the type of data that I'm copying, but there you have it. Very quick to get the data that we can sort of work with as we're seeking help. The other thing that we can do is we can output the entire graph as a CSV or as a JSON. We'll do it as a CSV. I'll go ahead and I'll put it, I guess, on my desktop for now. And 1 second while I browse to my desktop to open the file that I just exported. And there you have it, right? So each node name,
Datas.
Yeah, the status, is it hidden? Is it hidden? Is it an input? Is it an output? Is it frozen? Is it a function? Let's see if we can resize these all at once. Does it have a warning, issue or error? Is it info? Is the list empty? Is it null, dismissed alerts? Is it a dummy node, info count, renamed info icon, state the package that it came from, right? To sort of help you identify packages that are in use. So super useful there for graph node managers. The node GUID as well as the record ID, which I believe is the order that it was placed on canvas, perhaps. I don't know. All right, we won't save that since we're still working.
One last thing, Jacob, before we do a wind down, just show a group style because we have a dynamic color contrast change on the group style names if you use a dark one. This is a light one. So you need to make a new group style.
All right, so here's our standard ones. We'll add a live demo.
And choose like a dark color.
Dark color right there.
We'll see if it's in this version. No, that's fine. That's fine. We'll see if it's in the version you have. It's definitely in the 2.17 version.
I think I'm in 2.17. Yeah, I'm in 2.17. Okay. All right.
Cool.
Group style, live demo. There it is.
Oh no, okay. It's in 2.17.1 then. It should be turning white rather than being black text, so the color contrast stuff should fix. So, whoops, not quite there yet, but it is there. I promise. Coming.
All right, we'll leave it as kind of a different style for now, but yeah, it's super quick and easy to sort of set these up. I would probably recommend keeping that as a sort of standard setup for now. You can see drag and drop is still working. We'll do our alt left click. The node is right out of there. So again, super useful to be able to quickly adjust those as desired. And we can still do groups inside of groups, right? So we'll go ahead and create a group and then drag and drop. And hey, look at that. I now have a group in a group with a node that's not in a group, but can be quickly added back in again by drag and drop functionality.
Yes, I think we're at time, Jacob. So let's whip through the final pieces. Okay, so very quickly before I hand it back over to Tiana, we have started up again. So in 2 weeks' time, we're going to be running with our next set called Tinkering with Interoperability with special guest Guillermo Malatoni. Then we're going to be doing Taming the Chaos, where Jacob and I are going to take a very chaotic graph and use all of the tools you kind of saw today and more to kind of make it look a little nicer and be a little easier to understand. We're going to have some thoughts from Ollie Green, who can't make it live, but he'll be here as a ghost, and then getting on the same pages around management of stuff. So awesome things to come down the line.
All right. So thank you all for joining us today for the community conversation with Saul and Jacob. And thank you both for being here and walking us through all the new stuff. These are just ways for you to get involved in the community. And how you can also get involved in hosting potentially your own community conversations and contributing your own content and things like that. So definitely feel free to get involved. We always love to see people getting more involved in our community. So this is how you do that. And again, thank you all for coming. And I think that just about does it. So thank you, Saul and Jacob. I'll let you guys do a last word and we'll call it a day.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody. It's been a pleasure as always. Looking forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks.